Salvete! Welcome back to Weekly Roman History. I'm Madeline Weiner. In our last video, Rome went from its most stable and prosperous state under the 5 good emperors to a bit of a chaotic mess under the Severan Dynasty. Today, Rome will become a fully chaotic mess in the crisis of the 3rd century, then be brought back under control by Diocletian. A few questions to review. First, what dynasty took over after the end of the Nervan-Antonian dynasty and the year of the 5 emperors? Pause here if you need to think about it. If you said the Severan Dynasty, you're right. Septimius Severus was a strict and brutal military commander. Next, who took over after Severus's death? If you said his sons, you're right. Specifically, Caracalla and Geta, who spent their first year trying to kill each other. Caracalla won and led a bloodbath of his brother's former supporters. Caracalla was assassinated by the side of the road in 217. Next, which emperor famously imported an Eastern sun god? It was Elagabalus, a fascinating figure with a whole bunch of probably untrue stories. Finally, who was really in charge for the reigns of Elagabalus and Severus Alexander? That's right, it was their grandmother and mothers, whom we call the Julias. Elagabalus and Severus Alexander both took the throne as children and never held meaningful power. With the death of Severus Alexander, the Severan dynasty is definitively over. In the 50 years between the assassination of Alexander in 235 CE and the acclamation of Diocletian in 284 CE, at least 18 emperors take power with official acclamation from the Senate, and many, many more claim the title with varying levels of legitimacy. Nearly all of them are declared by armies in battlefields, and nearly all of them meet violent deaths. This is the crisis of the 3rd century. The mid-200s CE are the worst time in Roman history, apart from the actual fall of the 400s. This period is made worse by a strengthening of the adversaries across Rome's most volatile borders, the Sasanian Persians in the east and the Germans in the north. Emperors must spend all their time away from Rome, and a campaign going badly or just being unpleasant for the soldiers is enough to get them assassinated and replaced. In this era of battlefield emperors, the Senate and the city of Rome become increasingly irrelevant. The government of the empire moves away from Rome itself and into the provinces where the emperors fight. And yet, these emperors make a big show of trying to unite themselves with Rome's glorious past. There are many references to Roma Aeterna, or Eternal Rome, and the Emperor Phillip the Arab celebrates Rome's 1000th birthday in 248 CE with great pomp and circumstance. It makes sense that in a time of what feels like decline, the Romans reach into the past for strength. Most of the emperors of the crisis will barely get more than a mention in this video. For the most part, the list of emperors is just a catalog of battlefield appointments and murders. Only a few of them will be worth going into in detail. So, after Alexander's murder in 235, we have Maximinus Thrax, who our sources say was 8 feet 6 inches tall, but that's probably not true. He spends his reign fighting the German campaign that Alexander died during. In 238, Gordian, an 80-year-old governor in North Africa, is declared emperor by his people and acclaimed by the Senate. His son is declared joint Augustus, so they're Gordian the first and second. They are killed by Maximinus after only 20 days. But of course the Senate supported the Gordians, so they're already in trouble for treason. So they nominate 2 elderly senators in the Gordians' place. Their names are Balbinus and, I promise you are not ready for this name, Pupienus. They don't gain much popular support, so to give themselves a hint of dynasty, they declare Gordian I's 13-year-old grandson, Caesar. He becomes Gordian III. They fight against Maximinus for a while, until Maximinus's own troops turn on him and kill him. Then, Balbinus and Pupienus bicker until the Praetorians kill them both, leaving the young Gordian III in charge. All of that was in 238 CE, sometimes called the Year of the 6 Emperors. I told you that was coming. Don't worry, there's no Year of the 7 Emperors. Of course, since Gordian III is only 13, he isn't actually in charge. Gordian's Praetorian commander is his regent. His second Praetorian commander, Philippus, undermines support for him and leads a coup to replace him in 244, becoming emperor himself. Philippus was born in Arabia, so he is known as Philip the Arab. He was probably ethnically Arabian. He is pretty much only known for getting to celebrate Rome's 1000th birthday. Other than that, it's just more fighting Germans and Persians. In 249, a general named Decius rebels and kills Philip. Decius is famous for persecuting Christians and being the first emperor to die in battle against a foreign enemy. He dies fighting the Goths. No, not them. The Goths are a Germanic people who are becoming very important adversaries of Rome. At Decius's death in 251, his army appoints Trebonianus Gallus. Gallus has to deal with the Goths, the Persians, and a plague at home. He puts another general, Aemilius Aemilianus, in charge of fighting the Goths, so he can fight in the east. But of course, as soon as Aemilianus has any success against the Goths, his troops declare him emperor. Gallus's own troops murder him in 253 before the civil war starts. But wait, at Gallus's death, another general named Valerian is declared by his troops. Aemilianus's troops turn on him and murder him, and Valerian becomes emperor in 253. Let's slow down and talk about what's going on here. We see a series of emperors fighting constant wars on Rome's borders, primarily the Sasanian Persians in the east and the Goths and Germans in the north. This period makes especially obvious a failure that has been problematic all the way through the empire. There is no clear method of succession. There is no proper chain of command in the Roman army or government. The emperor is on top, obviously, but beneath him, all the governors in all the provinces are technically co-equal. They're all second place. So if an emperor is assassinated or dies in battle, any of the governors might replace him. And if multiple of them try at once, there's no impartial or peaceful way to sort it out. The only option is civil war. Or as many savvy officers in the 3rd century figure out, kill your commander before the war starts so you can avoid it. The progressive weakening of the Senate doesn't help. Fewer senators are holding military command in this era. Instead, officers are working their way up to command armies from inside the military itself. They're more competent generals, but they have no thought for civil life. They care only about the military. Rome's long-standing resistance to forming bureaucracies makes the stresses of the era worse. Because there are always at least 2 fronts on these wars, emperors can't lead the whole army themselves. They have to appoint someone to fight one war while they fight another. A dangerous proposition, since a bit of military success can lead a general to declare himself emperor. But war isn't the only stressor impacting Rome in this era. At the same time, an infectious disease is ravaging the empire. In 262, there are 5,000 deaths a day in the city of Rome alone. The depopulation leads to famine, and the emperor's attention is on war, so the people must fend for themselves. There are also problems with currency. War is expensive, civil war doubly so. Many emperors and usurpers resort to pressing new coins with less silver in them, making them worth less than their face value. This leads to inflation, which decreases tax revenue. Less tax money leads emperor to debase the currency further, which increases inflation in a deadly cycle. Finally, community unity is crumbling. Increasing imperial bureaucracy has led to a drain on local communities. Ambitious young men in the provinces are now joining the emperor's service, rather than participating in local government as they used to. This leads to less civic involvement on a local level, where before Roman peace led provincial people to unite to improve their own infrastructure. Now, local governments are not providing as much to their citizens. People start to find other groups to gather under to make their lives better, especially newer religions, including the cult of Mithras or Sol Invictus, and Christianity. Some emperors in this period see a threat in these new religions. Decius especially persecutes Christianity, hoping to unite people under traditional Roman religion. But the persecution only worsens community divisions, as neighbors inform on neighbors and mutual trust decreases. Early Rome succeeded by leaving local governments intact in its conquered territories, but emperors centralizing civil power has led to the decay of those local governments. Now the army is becoming the only functioning government mechanism, which is not a recipe for stability. Okay, back to the narrative. Valerian takes power in 253. Valerian makes his son Gallienus co-emperor, because as usual he needs to fight wars in the east and west at the same time. Gallienus takes over the war with the Western Goths, while Valerian fights the Persian Sasanians in the east. This is a winning strategy. Pick a good dynastic choice to become co-emperor, someone who won't overthrow you because you're family, and you can divide and conquer. But in 260, Valerian is captured and enslaved by the Sasanian Persians, and spends the rest of his life as the crown prince Shapur I's footstool. And that isn't a metaphor. Shapur has Valerian kneel and steps on his back to get on his horse. When Valerian does die some years later, Shapur has him stuffed and mounted in his trophy room like an animal killed on a hunt. It is a tremendously shameful end for an emperor, a major blow to Roman morale. Gallienus, Valerian's son, is left in control, but the empire is fracturing beneath him. At least 7 other men declare themselves emperor in the wake of Valerian's capture. Gallienus wisely decides not to avenge his father or try to get him back. In an earlier era, Rome's dignity would have demanded that they repay this insult, but in 260, Rome has much bigger problems. Gallienus focuses on facing the usurpers and bringing Italy and the center of the empire back under his power. In the west, Postumus, governor of Britain, declares himself emperor and wins the loyalty of Gaul and Spain. He even kills Gallienus' son, but Gallienus is stretched too thin to do anything about it. Postumus decides not to bother Gallienus any further either, so he just goes ahead and rules as emperor in his couple of provinces, like a co-emperor that no one asked for. We call Postumus' territory the Gallic Empire, and for 15 years, a whole different dynasty of Roman emperors rules there. It's a bizarre time, but this splinter empire works in Rome's favor. There's another emperor there to keep Gaul safe from invasion, giving Gallienus a smaller area to secure. A similar thing happens in the east. A Palmyran named Odenathus takes over, though he doesn't call himself emperor. He negotiates a peace with the Sasanians and effectively rules the eastern Roman provinces. On his death in 267, his wife Zenobia takes power on behalf of their young son. She begins to style herself as Augusta and take on the trappings of an emperor. That Gallienus lets all this happen is obviously not ideal for the power and prestige of Rome, but it oddly makes him one of the most successful emperors of the era. He shows restraint, not fighting wars he can't win, and making the best of a dreadful situation. He brings the central part of the empire under control, using a stable, light military presence along the borders and a larger, mobile field army that can go where it is needed. He also relies more heavily on cavalry, beginning a gradual change that will culminate in the dominance of the medieval knight. A quick break for review. First, what emperor celebrated Rome's 1000th birthday? That was Phillip the Arab, who killed the child emperor Gordian III to gain power. Next, what happened to Emperor Valerian? That's right, he was enslaved. More specifically, Prince Shapur I used him as a footstool. Next, which two regions effectively separated from the Roman Empire and were governed by others during the reign of Gallienus? Gaul and the Middle East both broke away. Gaul became the Gallic Empire after being taken by the Roman general Postumus, who established his own dynasty there. The Middle East was being run by a Palmyran woman named Zenobia, after the death of its previous unofficial ruler, her husband Odenathus. Finally, which two foreign groups gave Rome the most trouble during this era? If you said the Goths and the Sasanian Persians, you're right. The Goths were Germanic, and the Sasanians were Middle Eastern. It was their prince, Shapur I, who enslaved Valerian. Okay, back to the catalogue of dead emperors. Gallienus is murdered in 268 by a conspiracy led by Claudius, who gets called Claudius II, or Claudius Gothicus, in honor of victories against the Goths and other Germans. Claudius dies of a plague in 270, leaving his brother Quintillus in charge, but Claudius's own legions declare Aurelian instead, and Quintillus dies after as little as 17 days, possibly the shortest reign of any Roman emperor. Aurelian is another Illyrian commander, and an enormously successful emperor for this time. He sets out to reunite the empire that fragmented under Gallienus. He defeats Zenobia in war in 273, bringing the eastern provinces back into the fold. He has a brief battle with Tetrarchy, the last emperor of the Gallic Empire, before cutting a deal with him for a peaceful surrender of his territory. Both Zenobia and Tetrarchy are allowed to live in exile, and Aurelian reunites the empire after 14 years of fragmentation. He is known as Resitutor Orbis, or Restorer of the World. Aurelian's reforms in non-military areas are less successful. He tries to bring inflation under control by shutting down local mints and centralizing all coinage to imperial mints, which will guarantee the silver content of the coins. Ironically, this starts up the worst part of the inflation crisis, because economics never do seem to work like people think they're supposed to. In religion, Aurelian encourages a sort of monotheism under the god Sol Invictus, or the unconquerable sun. This is a Romanized version of various Eastern religions, including Mithraism and Elagabalus' worship of Elagabal. Sol Invictus will be the dominant deity in Roman religion up until the adoption of Christianity under Constantine. Finally, Aurelian admits Rome's shortcomings. He abandons Trajan's famous conquest, Dacia, because the army is stretched too thin and can't defend all of Rome's territory. And he orders the construction of a brick wall around the city of Rome. The last time Rome had city walls was in the 4th century BCE. Since then, it hasn't needed them. Roman dominance of all neighboring land meant that the city was not under threat from invaders. Aurelian admits that this is no longer the case. Parts of the Aurelian walls still stand in Rome today. Aurelian's restoration of the world is short-lived. He is murdered by his own soldiers in 275, having ruled for only 5 years. Another decade of turmoil follows. The soldiers apparently ask the Senate to appoint somebody emperor, which is odd for this period. The Senate chooses 75-year-old Tacitus, who isn't related to the famous historian of the Antonian period, but pretends he is. Tacitus is murdered by his own troops in 276, and replaced by his praetorian chief Florianus, who only lasts 88 days. A different legion declares Probus emperor, and Florianus's army is decimated by plague, so his troops turn on him. Probus reigns until 282 and spends the whole time fighting. He's only famous for putting on some of the largest and most lavish triumphal games Rome has ever seen. The next general to be declared by his troops is Carus in 282. He makes his son Carinus co-emperor in the west and goes east with his younger son Numerian. Carus dies in 283. He might have been struck by lightning, but our sources are not reliable at all. Numerian takes over for the east, but he's sickly and not faring well on campaign. He's being carried in a closed litter, which is something like this, with the curtains closed. In 284, a conspiracy among his officers kills Numerian in his litter, but they keep carrying him for a few days until the smell gives it away. The soldiers acclaim Diocletian, who takes his army toward the west to face Carinus. Carinus's officers kill him in 285, rather than face Diocletian's army, and Diocletian takes power as sole emperor. A few questions for review. First, which emperor is called Resitutor Orbis for reuniting the empire? That was Aurelian, who had mixed results but certainly did put an end to the official fragmentation of the empire. Next, which of these facets of Roman life does not see significant change during this period? Let's talk about the things that did change. Money was in turmoil as officials debased the value of coins and others tried to rehabilitate them. The military was the site of the most development, and many changes occurred, including a greater emphasis on cavalry and an organization into frontier guards and centralized mobile battle units. Religion was moving steadily away from the old official state religion. The trendiest two religions of this time were Christianity and Mithraism, or sun worship. And local government was in decline in favor of the central imperial government, weakening community unity. The only thing on my list that hasn't been changing is Roman citizenship. Caracalla granted it to every male in the empire in 212, and it hasn't changed. Diocletian's ascension marks the end of the crisis of the 3rd century. He proves to be a capable reformer, and he changes Rome so much that we have a new word for the type of government he establishes. Diocletian was born with the name Diocles in Dalmatia. Yes, he's a Dalmatian. Dalmatia is in Illyria in Eastern Europe. This region produced many 3rd century emperors, including Aurelian. Diocletian's hometown is called Spalatum. Nowadays, it's a town in Croatia called Split. Since Diocletian's most famous role in history is splitting Rome into east and west, there's something very funny about that. He was likely the son of a freedman, a very humble origin for an emperor. He was a member of the newly established imperial bodyguard, the Protectores. The Praetorian Guard has assumed so many new roles that they are no longer the emperor's bodyguards. He probably participated in the conspiracy that murdered Numerian in his litter, but he pretended to be innocent, and accepts the soldier's nomination as emperor. Diocletian is acclaimed in 284, and defeats Carinus for sole power in 285. Diocletian knows that one emperor can't handle all the military threats the empire faces, so in the same year he appoints a Caesar the way the adoptive emperors did. He chooses someone he knows and trusts who is not in his family. Diocletian's new Caesar is Maximian, another Illyrian military officer who'd come from humble origins and risen through the ranks. Maximian immediately goes to war in Gaul with great success, and in 286 Diocletian elevates Maximian to full Augustus. Technically, the two emperors now have the same rank, though Diocletian is unquestionably the senior emperor. They remain intensely loyal to each other for the next 20 years. Their partnership is key to the stability of this era. They depict themselves as brothers on coins and inscriptions, though they share no blood link. They are also often depicted as Jupiter and Hercules in propaganda, Diocletian being Jupiter, of course. After a few years of constant fighting on many fronts, Diocletian decides that even two emperors aren't enough. Diocletian and Maximian appoint two more Illyrian generals to be their Caesars, Galerius with Diocletian in the east, and Constantius with Maximian in the west. This is Diocletian's innovation, which we call the Tetrarchy, or rule by 4. 2 Augusti, who were the senior emperors, and 2 Caesares, who would succeed them, all 4 of whom can lead armies. The Tetrarchy is successful. Between the four of them, they bring all the rebellions and invasions under control. They win back all the land Rome lost in the 3rd century and even gain some new territory. When a new threat pops up, the emperor doesn't have to cut short a different war to go deal with it. Another can just go instead. Since the emperors are in a hierarchy and the Caesars are promised a promotion someday, they pose no risk to stability. Diocletian brings an end to the crisis of the 3rd century by finally establishing a hierarchy of succession underneath the emperor, which Rome has lacked since Augustus. Diocletian also takes much firmer control over the government. I mentioned way back in the Augustus video that historians call the first period of the empire the Principate. Augustus and his successors positioned themselves as princeps, not a monarch, merely the chief citizen, the first among equals. Diocletian dispels any pretense of the Republic. After 300 years, the fiction is meaningless. Historians call this new era the Dominate. The emperor is not princeps, but dominus, master. The Dominate is true authoritarianism, rather than authoritarianism with a polite veneer of the Republic. With this new unabashed power comes a new public face. Where before the emperor was supposed to mingle with the Senate and the people as equals, Diocletian and the other tetrarchs hold themselves superior. They wear crowns and purple cloaks, and shoes studded with jewels. In the style of Eastern rulers, Diocletian makes people bow at his feet and kiss his cloak. The emperors are all worshipped as living gods. The whole imperial court takes on a military rather than a civil style. The emperor's underlings wear military dress instead of togas, and the emperors keep the short beards of soldiers rather than the long beards of philosophers and statesmen. And the imperial court is no longer centered at Rome. This is a change that has been coming. Many of the emperors in the 3rd century crisis never set foot in Rome during their reigns. Now the Senate is more irrelevant than ever. Rome is strategically unimportant because it's in the center, and all the fighting is on the borders, and there are 4 emperors constantly on the move. Their imperial courts travel with them, and the capital is wherever an emperor is. Many border cities are rebuilt in Roman style so they can serve as suitable capitals for tetrarchs. And to complete the picture of Italy's de-emphasis, Diocletian divides Italy into provinces for the first time and makes Italians pay taxes along with the provincials. Diocletian brings stability back to Rome, but it's a considerably less Roman Rome than when he started. We'll pause here, since the end of Diocletian's reign kicks off another complex era of turmoil. So let's end this video on a peaceful note. Late antiquity is in full swing, and the clouds of the fall of Rome are on the horizon. But first, we'll meet an emperor who brings in one of the biggest social changes in Roman history. In our next video, Constantine and the rise of Christianity.